Yeah, man. See where it gets you. Your wife's head in a box.
Welcome to Groovy Movies. My name is Lily Austin.
And my name's James Brailsford. Hello.
Hello. And this week we are talking about a thriller classic, a film that we all know.
A neo-noir.
A neo-noir that you'll recognise when you hear the phrase, "What's in the box?"
What's in the box?
David Fincher's 1995 movie, Se7en.
1995, yeah, because it was on re-release recently, which I think is why it got into our minds to cover this. The 30th anniversary. I mean, yeah, I saw this when it came out in 95. I was at Bradford University. I just started in September. And they in the city centre, it's no longer a cinema, or it might be reopening as a theatre right now, but it was an old-fashioned picture palace. It was an Odeon, so it was a huge... I think it was a single screen, or if it not, the main screen was like... from 100 years ago with a stage almost, and the raked seating that goes all the way back. So a proper movie-going experience.
And what was your initial thoughts and feelings about the film after seeing it?
Oh, yeah. I remember coming out of the cinema and we were all like 18, 19, so we were young adults. But I remember just thinking, oh, my God, the world is a bleak and dark place. And, I'll never have a happy thought again. It was like to be hit with that ending, which now it's kind of almost become a pop culture cliche. But that ending, for the first time, when you don't know that that's coming up, it kind of floors you. So I remember that was... But I also remember thinking, wow, it looked great. As far as it was just a very atmospheric film. So it was the twist that hit you. But to be honest with you, over the years, I think the twist is the least interesting part of it, to the point that it almost distracts perhaps from how good the film is, or much better. It's more than just its twist, basically.
I agree. I totally agree. And I guess we have to say up front, I've already slightly spoiled it. We are going to be talking about the ending. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to pause at this point and go watch it. Because I think, I watched it, I think, when I was a teenager, so a bit after it came out. And I remember thinking it was better than it needed to be, in a way. I think that the 90s, kind of in the wake of The Silence of the Lambs, there were many of these sorts of detective thriller, horror mashups coming out. And most of them were kind of average, but, fun, entertaining.
I remember watching one with Denzel Washington, I think, and it's exactly that. It's a neo-noir, but a supernatural horror thing. And it's it has a big central premise about some kind of horrible ghost that's it's possessing serial killers. I don't know, but it's what you just described amazing. There. It was like the definitive one of those, and it promises much, but just completely mid in every respect, just very forgettable as well.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, Se7en absolutely could have been that movie, because I don't think the script itself is a great work of writing. If I'm honest, I think it's a little bit the Se7en gimmick is a very fun framework with which to hang the story on.
But it's a bit thin.
It's a bit thin, it's a bit pulpy, and nothing wrong with that.
It's a bit underdeveloped.
Yeah, and also, I don't think if we're just going to go straight into it, I don't think the characters are all that well developed. I think that Brad Pitt, he plays a young detective. Sorry, let's just do a log line before I get into this. Log line. A detective close to retirement, played by Morgan Freeman, Detective William Somerset, is joined by a new recruit to their team, Detective David Mills, played by Brad Pitt. In one of his first roles, I think he was known at this point because he'd done Thelma and Louise, which had kind of shot him to stardom. But this was really one of his earliest lead roles. And they play these detectives who were over 7 days hunting down a serial killer who is staging these very brutal and cruel and almost camp in their kind of theatricalness murders that are based on the seven deadly sins.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a very pulpy story, and when I was watching this the most recent time, the last couple of times I've watched it, I have thought, yeah, in other hands, this would not be considered much of a classic. But this is a classic example of what happens if you get it in the right hands. It's a solid enough story that is very simplistic, but it's almost been treated by David Fincher as a bit of a mythic fairy tale. So you need these archetypes. You need the grizzled, almost retired, seen-it-all detective. You need the young pup. You need those elements to make this kind of like over-the-top, like gothic serial killer world work. The whole point is you've got to believe there's a world where there's two honest coppers who do nothing wrong, and then there's a real bad guy who's planned his whole life to do this bad thing. In that world, that's where this film can exist. But this is just a classic case of you give it to the right people and they are able to take that source material and pull more from it. For me, Se7en is a vibes film. To me, it's the atmosphere. It's the cocktail of everything coming together. That's what makes it work for me.
And it very almost did get into the wrong hands because Andrew Kevin Walker, the screenwriter, initially he sold it to an Italian production company called Penta Films. And first of all, they made him rewrite the ending. So let's get rid of that incredible twist that we will discuss later on. I'm going to tease it out a bit longer. And instead,
God damn it, watch the film if you haven't, please.
Yeah, seriously. And in, you know what, I'm just going to spoil it because I need to explain it for the thing. As you probably know, the big reveal at the end is that, I don't even know how to describe this, a box is delivered to where the murderer is with the two cops. And inside the box is Brad Pitt's wife, played by Gwyneth Paltrow's head. The big reveal is that his wife has been killed, and here is the proof of that. And that ending is, stone cold, quite shocking. You don't expect such a savage ending, even though it's queued up the whole way through that it's going to be a bad ending. They say it a number of times during the movie. But this production company, they asked him to rewrite it so that it would be her being kidnapped by the serial killer, and then it's a race against time as they find him, and then you rescue her. Happy ending. Terrible. Completely different film. Very generic, boring ending that we've seen a million times. So, but that was where it was headed. And then, fortunately for all of us, the production company folded, and so the script was out there again. At which point, New Line Cinema picked it up and it gave it to David Fincher, and actually by mistake sent him the original script with the head in the box. And then when they realised their mistake, had then sent him the rewrite, and he was like, "No, absolutely not. I'm not doing this without that ending. It's everything." And Brad Pitt also said the same thing. He backed him and said, "Yeah, I'm not going to sign on unless we do that."
I love that when actors kind of sign onto a project, but they have it in their contract that they insist on certain things not changing. It's like Samuel L. Jackson said he would do Snakes on a Plane as long as it was in his contract. They would not change the title of the film. So the only way he was doing it is if it stayed called Snakes on a Plane. And it's that kind of thing. It's like, don't fudge any. But when you watch it, though, it's clear. It's very well done. But when you watch it, it's clear that there's been a bit of shenanigans with the ending, because even the very first time I saw it, I thought it was very nicely wrapped up, and that I think it's a quote from Ernest Hemingway that's been read voiceover by Morgan Freeman's character. But the thing is, it's the first time he's done any voiceover in the entire film. Like, normally when voiceover is used in a film, you don't expect it to be the only time it appears is at the end. So it's very classy and it works. Don't get me wrong. But even at the time, I was like, there's been some shenanigans here. There's no way it was written in the script that the first time he does voiceover is the very last thing.
So what was it originally?
Cut to black after you see the head in the box, I think.
Okay. So why did that change?
Because at the test screening, when they did it, the projectionist immediately put the lights up, because the idea was it cuts hard to black when he sees the head in the box. It's either the head in the box or when he shoots the John Doe dead, right? But it's a hard cut to black, 10 seconds of black with no music, and then it's like directed by David Fincher. But the projectionist accidentally put the lighting on as soon as it went to black, and so the audience just had no time to let things sink in. They were just like, that was the worst ending to a film ever. And so the studio all freaked out, and they said, what you need is a little bit of a buffer between that ending just to let the audience cool down, which I actually do completely agree with. You just need a moment to just be like, holy shit, and then end the film, because it was way too abrupt, way too harsh. So So that ending with Somerset and quoting from Hemingway, that was all kind of post-produced. That was all that was meant to be the ending.
Right, got it. Okay, well, I mean, I have to say I'm not as cine literate as you. I didn't clock it as jarring, but you're right. It's strange that it would just come through. But I think that there was throughout the film, one of the things that for me is kind of funny about the script and the story is that it is a bit pretentious, right? There's a lot of, it's very literate. There's like a lot of literary, I should say. It's like there's a lot of reference to books and literature, which is kind of part of what the serial killer is like using to. He's got some kind of philosophy about the sins and about there's this whole thing about how the city they live in is like is decrepit and dank and sinful.
And I love that the city's never referred to by any other name apart from the city. You know, so it isn't referred.
Me.
Oh, I loved that. I loved that.
It felt very Batman to me. Like,
oh yeah, I mean yeah, like it's Gotham, but like
so Gotham.
Again, it's just like this any town. You know, it could be just like this. It's just a bleak, dark place that isn't, and without naming it, it just, you know, I do think David Fincher put a lot of effort into making this film have a timeless feel to it. And even though, yes, it's meant to be contemporary for when the film was made in the 90s, like, all the way through it, he's tried to make sure there's nothing that cops too much to the here and now. You know, it's the classic case of if you want your fashion to look timeless, look at something that's been around for 30 years. And so even little details like when they have the fingerprints scanned, because they have some fingerprints at one point, they go to a computer expert in the forensics lab. His computer is like something from the 1970s, even though this is set in the 1990s, because, again, you look 20, 30 years back, it gives even the technology that's in Se7en feels timeless.
Yeah, well, that's true. I think even though that is the whole story of the film, that's the whole theme that they're exploring, it gets my back up when people are talking about cities full of sin, and it just feels like a very kind of right-wing, pejorative, like moralizing about things, which is what the whole film is. And actually, and the whole thing is that there are all these contradictions with that. So I don't think actually like this is a flaw with it. It's just something that I personally find a little irritating is this whole notion that, you know, this place is just so full of sin and people doing terrible things and we just need to like cleanse it of this place. You know, this kind of framing is so toxic to me. I'm not into it. But having and the way they're constant referring to this city as this like terrible place. But I mean, and that kind of it felt very to me like myth making, myth building, you know, the kind of the legend of this place. And that felt to me a little bit kind of hammy. But in a way that's fine, because this film, despite the fact that you might think it's kind of grounded in reality because it's very like dark and dirty and like dank and all these shades of, it's coloured in all these greens and yellows and you know, off hues. That none of that is no more reality than, you know, Wicked is. It's this kind of like you said, a kind of anti-fairy tale kind of.
It's incredibly stylized. I mean,
stylized, exactly.
It's shot by the same cinematographer who shot Delicatessen and City of the Lost Children, which are two of possibly the most stylized films you'll ever see. So it's that sensibility being brought down to earth a bit. But, you know, for me, the other thing that stuck out when I first saw it, and still to this day hold up, is just how beautifully it's shot. It's like for a film that is nightmarish and dark and got some very graphic images, they are all very beautifully, tastefully done. It is like the most tasteful, grunge, decrepit-looking images you'll see on screen. You know, they managed to make it look aesthetically quite appealing for what is a very gloomy image, you know. And he uses shadow all the way through the film. It's a very dark film, and yet the mastery of being able to film things that are shadowy, but for it not, the whole image not to go to complete mush. Because when you're in shadows, you've got to define those shadows. You've got to work with silhouettes, and it's masterfully done. So just as far as how beautiful the image looks, you know, that's to me, it was made at the very height of Hollywood, as far as they were still making big budgeted original movies. They were shooting on film. They had enough time in the schedule to get shots looking beautiful rather than having to rattle through it. So this is, to me, is like the ultimate. This is what you can do when you have the time and the money that Hollywood did in the 90s to make these films.
It was made for 30 million. Was that a big budget in the 90s?
I'd say that's like, because in the 90s, my head was like this. We had the first 100 million budget movie in the 92. That was Terminator 2. Made headlines for its first 100 million. So 100 million was what you spent at the top of the range. So 30 million, I would say, was comfortably in the upper low to mid-budget movie. It was like, everyone got paid well. You had money to do fun stuff like have rain in every shot, which costs a fortune. So you had the money to make it look like a big movie.
Yes. And can I just clarify that it's an issue with the sort of the dialogue, but not with the film itself, because I think that David Fincher really was masterful in taking the story, this preoccupation in the script, and making and translating it to the visual, and it works incredibly well. So even though, certain things about that script and about that whole concept is slightly like irritating to me, a little bit cringe, as a whole film, it works together beautifully. And you're right, I think it does look amazing and just takes this film to a whole other level, which I think is why it stood the test of time. This film is mentioned quite often, I feel, generally, like it's referred back to and remembered in a way that few other films of this genre from the 90s, and there were, as we said, so many of them, are remembered. And I think that's why. Moving back to your mention of the rain. So I read that the reason that it rained in every shot was because they only had Brad Pitt for 55 days.
Yeah.
And so if it had rained, they would have been screwed. I didn't quite understand what that meant.
My understanding of that is basically there's lots of exteriors in the film, and so they decided to shoot all of it with artificial rain, which meant that even if it was in reality raining, it didn't matter because it was meant to be rain. If they decided to shoot those sequences and it was meant to be dry and not raining, as soon as it actually in reality starts raining in LA, then it means they have to stop shooting. It means that suddenly there's a day off the schedule where they didn't shoot with Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt's 55 days. He doesn't give a shit if you go over schedule. He's out after 55. So you make every shot a rain shot, so then you never have to stop filming.
Okay, understood. I will say that LA is not known for having a lot of rain. So
no, I know.
It was either a forecast that there was going to be rain, or that was sort of a line and really, because I mean, it does really, it's just so part of the film's aesthetic that it's always raining. It too also makes it seem like a city out of time and not you, even though it's quite clear that it is probably LA where they're filming. It's not like it's clear at all, and I think the rain only adds to that. It could be any dark, depressing city.
This permanently raining, glooming. There's no escape from it. Even if it's not nighttime, it still feels like it because of the gloom of this ever-present rain. There's some beautiful shots. There's a shot of Brad Pitt's character crossing the road. It's a big wide shot, and he's in complete silhouette with the rain behind him, kind of got a beam of sunlight breaking through. It's almost like even though you are in the daytime, it still feels that nighttime kind of oppressive kind of feeling. You can't escape for it even in the daytime. And also just from a technical point of view, it's a film that uses the silver retention process, or bleach bypass, on 200 of the prints. So if you got to see a film print, there was like 2,000 made, but if you're one of the lucky few, you might have seen a silver retention print. Now, I went to see it about 5 years ago with Emily at the Prince Charles.
And friend of the podcast, Emily.
Friend of the podcast, Emily, and I'm pretty damn sure that was a silver retained 35mm print. Basically, even if you scan that digitally, I saw the IMAX re-release a couple of weeks ago. The fact that it's like silver chemical, like literal silver chemistry in the film stock, means that it has a look that you just cannot emulate with a digital projector. The only way you get to see what silver retention looks like is see one of these film prints.
But so why were there only a few of these?
Because it costs loads of money, and it takes time to do. Each print costs more money and takes more time to do. And if you're trying to pump out 2,000 for all the multiplex, you're just not going to have enough time or money to do that. So you just focus on a handful for all the key areas, like probably New York and LA and London had them.
I see. And sorry, so what does it do, the silver?
It increases the amount of So remember, this is, again, the other reason why Se7en looks so good. This is a pre-digital era of Hollywood. So in the 90s, everything was done on film stock. There was no computer digitization of it at all. So you made physical film prints, and in making those film prints, when you do the silver retention process, silver is part of film, and it's usually washed away as part of the development of film. When you process the film, the silver's washed away and you're left with the image. If you don't wash away the silver, it makes the image look really contrasty. It also makes it look kind of desaturated, the colours, so the colours don't pop. The blacks are very black, and the contrast is quite harsh, and the colours are all kind of faded down, which suits Se7en perfectly, because that's very much what Se7en looks like, and so it was enhanced with this process.
Amazing. Wow. Well, I hope one day I get to see that version of it.
It's like that, and seeing a nitrate print are like the kind of the rarefied air of viewing a film print. They are like, I haven't done a nitrate print yet. That's still on the bucket list.
We should go together, James. I want to
absolutely,
see one.
and pray that we do, and pray that it doesn't combust and set the projection booth on fire. That's the risk of nitrate.
Okay, well, speaking of potential calamities, let's talk about. That's not a smooth segue at all, but I want to talk about the seven sins.
Oh yeah.
The calamity I'm referring to is all these horrific acts that happen, because as we said, that it's a bit of a gimmick, but it's also the thing that I have to say makes this film so great, because the whole way through you're anticipating what the next sin will be and how it's going to be staged, because the first two are, I think, the most disturbing and powerful. I think that as we go on, it's slightly they start to get a bit thrown away in the second half of the film, I think.
Yes, they do, because the plot needs things to accelerate, doesn't it? So it's almost like they're almost like getting in the way at that point. But yeah, I mean, if this was a Netflix series, we'd have one episode per sin, wouldn't we?
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't mind them remaking it for Netflix. No, because what you lose with not having the amount of time on each crap, you just get the pacing. It rattles along. I guess.
By the end of the
But the thing that the very first one, we start with gluttony, and I kind of don't even want to talk about it too much because it's so disturbing. But it is a punishment for a man who's very overweight. And he is basically forced to eat until he kills himself. And I mean, that is so disturbing and powerful.
It kind of sets that's it. If you're not into this film, like, I would not stick with it. It sets the tone, let's say, from the get-go. I mean, I think that's the other thing about this film. I think from the very first shot, it sets the tone. Like, the whole film is pitch perfect for as far as the world that you're in from the get-go. You're under no illusions.
But that is a very... I don't quite know how to put it, but it's sort of a very neat first sin, because the quote-unquote sin is clear and the punishment sort of is in keeping with that, But then, I don't know how to say that in a way that doesn't make it seem like I'm advocating for this. Yes, even though in the world of this story, we do not agree with that. I just
we were not worried. I mean, I wasn't worried you're a sociopath now, Lily, but me wonders if you'd protest too much.
It was just when I was listening back to our episode of Juno, and in it I said, as the film mentions, teen pregnancy is a toxic environment, and I was worried, like, I hope they understand that that's not what I think. That's just what the character says in the film.
Is it classic? Can we separate the art from the artist? Can we separate the podcast from the podcaster?
Well, no. I'm just like that's the opposite of what I was saying. Anyway, so I'm just sharing, guys, behind the curtain of my own anxieties about this podcast and whether or not I come across as a judgmental monster. Anyway, the second sin, greed, is also similarly fitting, because
which is greed again? Just remind me.
So it's a high profile lawyer who is killed at his home, and he's made to cut out a pound of his own flesh. So, the phrase pound of flesh, again, not pleasing to look at in the film, but pleasingly fitting.
Yeah.
But then things start to get a bit confusing, because the third one is probably the most disturbing, and the only real jump scare of the movie is sloth. And oh my God, it's like horrific. I when we first talked about doing this episode, I thought, the only thing I really remember of Se7en is the head in the box at the end. I mean, which, can I just say, is kind of amazing, because actually you never see the head in the box.
No, you
only
don't.
See the box.
You think you do.
You think you do, but it's that powerful a concept and an image in one's mind that you remember it. But then as the film began, I suddenly remembered, oh God, yeah, there's this really harrowing thing with this man who you think is starved to death, lying tied to a bed, and then the detective putting his torch over his face and whispering close to this poor skeletal head, "You deserve what you get," or something like that. He said something very unpleasant to this guy who, okay, he was a paedophile, but still, I was like, this is not the moment. And just at that moment, the guy kind of comes to life, and it's like, ah! And they're like, oh, he's alive. And that reaction from the detective, the actor, was absolutely real, apparently. And
Yes.
I believe it. We all jump with it. It's horrific.
Oh, yeah, I remember the jump scare the first time. It was like a terrific jump scare because it's the best executed jump scares, I think, are the ones that aren't in films you expect them to be in. Now, Se7en, fair enough, it's a scary film, so you expect it, but it's not like a straight-up horror film with like a bad guy chasing you. So same with in The Dark Knight, I think one of the best jump scares. So you don't expect in a Batman film for there to be like a jump scare sequence. Same with Se7en. They get you, and also it's the only one in the film. It's not like they repeat that pattern.
Well, yeah, exactly. There haven't been any jump scares during the film up to this point, so you're really not expecting it. And the thing that is, I think, one of the most powerful things about Se7en is that there's very little violence on camera. All of these horrific murders, you only see the aftermath of it. You never see anyone being tortured, anything happening, which gives this kind of, I don't know, I find that very effective, because if anything, it's almost like the horrificness of it seeps into your bones a bit more. Then you're just like given something to jump at and disturb you in the, there's less gratuitous and more kind of unsettling.
Yeah, and also just to keep, what it means is we never leave the detectives to kind of go see what the serial killer's up to. So it means we're seeing the film very much purely from the detectives, how they experience it, which is they only turn up at the crime scenes afterwards. We don't have a scene where we see John Doe, even if he's in silhouette and he's a mystery to us, we don't see him torture the victims. That would not be as good a film at all, in fact. So by doing that, it also means that the audience is also on the back foot, just like they are. We don't know who John Doe is any more than they do. And so it just, the feeling that I got on the first viewing, almost very early on in the first few minutes, it's like, the detectives are not in control here. They are being played. And that's what the whole film is that they are part of this grand design of John Doe. From the get-go, they were never going to get ahead of him, So I don't know. That the fact that we see the crime scenes afterwards all plays into that feeling of dread, that kind of like they're on a path here that they haven't chosen. Yes,
absolutely. But just to bring it back to my displeasure with what happens with these sins.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No. But they obviously, the writer, obviously, the script writer obviously was struggling to think of how to make sloth a torturous sin. Because what is the sin of being lazy that kind of manifests in a human being? Because he goes for a paedophile, which, of course, is a horrific sin. But, it would actually be more, I don't know, would possibly be better suited to lust, I guess.
You know what, Lily? You make a very good point. It's also, I've never even thought about that. I guess I'm just I'm getting caught up with the story. But now you come to mention it. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, for me, I was very, very into the neatness of the punishment fitting the crime, and that one does not fit at all. And the punishment of starving him and tying him to the bed. Okay, he's being forced to lie in a bed. He's being forced to be lazy. It just doesn't fit as neatly, even though it is the most disturbing and sort of, I think, impactful of the sins.
Stop spoiling all my fun.
The other two, right. But that actually, in fairness, thinking about it, that's the only one that I felt like didn't fit as neatly. The others do, but if we then jump ahead to the final two sins and the twist. I have to say, I actually haven't seen much discourse about this online. I feel like people are so pleased with this film in general that it doesn't matter. But so what was the idea? That John Doe knew about Brad Pitt's detective joining the force, or was it that a last minute pivot and he decides to then involve them both in it? Because basically the final two sins, the twist is John Doe, played by Kevin Spacey, we'll come back to that later, the final two sins are his own covetousness, because he covets Gwyneth Paltrow, Brad Pitt's wife, and wants her, and so he has sinned, and so he cuts off Gwyneth Paltrow's head in order to make Brad Pitt feel so pissed off that he will kill him, and his sin is wrath. I mean, to be honest, it's clunky. It doesn't really work, I don't think.
It doesn't really. Again, if we're holding it up to the cold light of day, if we're extracting it from the kind of the vibe and the atmosphere, absolutely, it doesn't work. But again, in the moment, you're like, yep, fine, he's pissed off. What a bad man. The other thing, and now you mention it, so you're saying, because it's all been planned for multiple years. I mean, the sloth guy was held a prisoner for a year, apparently, and tortured. So the idea is, are you saying, did he know a year ago that it was going to be Brad Pitt? I mean, my understanding of it is like absolutely not. And in fact, once he got a photograph of Brad Pitt, he knew who he knew who his victims were going to be. So at some point in his plan, or at least quite recently in his plan, he decided to target Brad Pitt. So I don't think it was that big preordained, and I'm sure if he didn't have a wife, he'd find something else to envy, because he's a sociopath. So he's always going to execute his plan. It doesn't matter if the reality doesn't match what his plan's going to be. He'll just distort the truth to work.
I guess you're right.
You sound weary though. You don't want me to. Well, come on, fight back, Lily. I don't like hearing you sound like this. Not a resigned, you're right. Come on, get those dukes up.
Well, okay, here's the thing. So this is the second film or TV show where there is a detective investigating something. Okay, what I'm thinking about is The Bridge. Have you seen The Bridge, the TV show,
no,
the Danish-Swedish TV show? Brilliant. Okay. But it starts out as, it's called The Bridge because a body is found on the middle of the bridge between Malmö in Sweden and Copenhagen in Denmark. There's that bridge that goes between them. And there is a body found right in the middle, perfectly in the middle. And so a detective from each side come along, and there's this very cute, charismatic, I thought he was quite cute, charismatic detective who's older. And then there's this younger woman who's not charming in the way he is. She's very matter of fact and we need to do this, and a little bit unusual. Anyway, they come together to start to solve this crime, which is the first of many crimes. I won't spoil what happens in that first episode, but oof, it's amazing. And from there, and basically it appears that there is a serial killer, sociopath, who is taking it upon himself to put out a message about the issues, the social problems that there are in Sweden and Denmark. And so each horrible thing that happens is trying to put a message out about, the treatment of people who are impoverished or various kind of social issues, right? And I found that very, very effective. It was a great, that combination worked really well. But then at the very end, the twist, basically it turns out that it was actually much more personal than you think. And for me, that was a disappointing cop-out.
Oh, no.
Cop being the operative word, because it sort of undid all of it. And I thought that, the powerful thing about it was that the issues being pointed out by the serial killer were true and accurate, but obviously what he was doing was horrific. But I thought that kind of contradiction was powerful, and then for it to turn out to not really be about that, and that was he was just trying to hoodwink them, and really he didn't give a fuck about that, I found a bit annoying. And in a similar vein, it was not as bad as that. Already from the start of Se7en, this serial killer's whole vitriol morality is obviously flawed from the get-go and contradictory and silly. So it doesn't really matter so much that the final sin is a more personal thing. And I get why you would do that. But I don't know. I just felt in terms of the hitting all of these sins, it wasn't the satisfying
got you
final sins that I would have liked. But then I don't know what else I would have wanted, because it is pretty effective. Let's be honest. A head in a box. What more could you want?
Yeah, it was very effective when it stayed with me for sure the first time I saw it, and but now I come back because it is much more than that. But, Yeah, I think the disappointing reality of serial killers, because it's a current hyperfixation, is just that they're not as elaborate as films make them out. You know, it's there's rare. I don't think I've read of any who has an actual big scheme that he's trying to make comments of, and in fact, the reality of it is that they might say those things when in fact they just like killing people, and it's just like it's nice to put a tag on it because it makes them seem like they've got a grander mission than killing people.
I mean, can I just say that I don't in real life I don't hope that serial killers have a grand mission or anything. It's just within a story. It's fun.
What we talk. Just in case. Again, you're very worried about your image here, Lily.
Well, I'm just saying. James, I was worried about your image just then. Saying the disappointing reality of serial killers is that it's not as complex.
Sorry, let me reframe that.
Films.
Within the film, purely from a narrative purpose, the disappointing reality of serial killers is that they don't really have a grand design. You know, although saying this out loud, I'm probably going to become part of a victim of a serial killer who's got a grand design of killing off podcasters. So I realise I'm setting myself up here. But the point is, reality is usually much duller than the fiction. Yeah.
Well, okay, so just we touched on it a bit, but I mean, first of all, how surreal to see Kevin Spacey playing the serial killer after everything that's gone down. He does play creepy very well. His calmness is effective.
And also at this point in time, just to put it in some context, because I saw it when I was like 18, 19 in 95. Who the fuck was Kevin Spacey then? It was his year apparently. Like he had a very good agent as far as like getting him just the right roles. He was in The Usual Suspects and he was in Se7en. They were both like smaller roles, like featured cameos. Well, not in Usual Suspects, but basically they weren't the show-stealing part, and yet they both stole the show. So it kind of established him with those two parts coming out the same year. It kind of put him on the map.
And fair play to Kevin Spacey. We can say this about him. He requested that his name not be in the opening credits because, okay, he wasn't a hugely known star, but he was an established actor. And if we'd have seen that name, you could have deduced that he was a serial killer. And a big part of the film is, as you said, following the detectives and the build up to the reveal of who he is.
And it's such a good thing to get rid of credits at the start of the film. I saw a Ghost film, Nicole Kidman, I think it's called The Others, and it's got a bunch of credits at the start of the film. And I was like, almost at the end of the film, and none of the names on the credits had appeared. I was like, okay, I know what the twist is now, because half the cast who are in the opening credits titles haven't turned up yet. So I think I know what's going on.
It's an important thing, but save the credits till the end, folks. We don't need to see that.
Exactly.
On the same vein of casting, Gwyneth Paltrow plays a wife, quite thinly done. She's really got not much personality. No. And I think
it's like the most Gwyneth Paltrow role I've ever seen her in, I think.
It is, but it's also just the standard role that women in these movies always play. There's always a wife whose job it is to like make the men bond, and that's her only purpose. And I think that, it is a very powerful scene, that final scene with the head in the box. But it would have been nice to have been a little bit more invested in the woman whose head she belonged to, or it belonged to her. And also Brad Pitt's detective, I don't think he's that well drawn. I feel like Morgan Freeman got served the best. He has the most well kind of defined personality, and his and his principles are so inherent to who he is, and I feel like it's a little bit sketched out in Brad Pitt in comparison.
Maybe, yeah. But also, he's meant to be he's not got all the world-weary wisdom that Morgan Freeman has. So he's a thinner, emptier character who loves messing around with his dogs. I just saw him as a bit of an empty vessel character. But
I don't know. I don't buy that at all, because I don't think just because you love your dogs and you don't have world weariness doesn't mean you're an empty or thin character. He has just as much character. He should have just as much character as Morgan Freeman's. It's just a very different character, right? That the whole thing is they're meant to be chalk and cheese, younger and older, cynic versus optimistic. But the nuance of Morgan Freeman's character is that he's meant to be cynical, but you can tell that he isn't really.
He's a softie, really.
He's a softie, really, and he cares, and he has this that's all there, and you do see that a bit with his interaction with Gwyneth Paltrow when they go for coffee together, and there's more to him, and that's interesting, and there's always more to everyone. No one is a completely empty, vapid vessel. And I would have liked to have had just a bit more of a sense of who David Mills is. Like, we get these hints about the fact that he's married his childhood sweetheart and the fact that he wanted to come here. But like, why did he want to come and be a part of this like horrible, grim city? Like, give me a little bit more. But I mean, but it's fine because, you know, I'm really nitpicking here. As a whole, it works together. It's way more than we get from most of these kinds of movies, as I already said. So it's not a big issue.
It sounds like you'd have some ideas for the Netflix 10-part series. Then, you know, we'd flesh out Brad Pitt's character. Let's have one episode per sin. You know,
Yeah. I mean, it would be. The thing is, we've had so many. Like we have True Detective. You know what I mean? Like we've got these great TV shows that have kind of corrected those criticisms. You know, they're like, yeah, we're actually spoiled for good detective shows and films, and they have all built on the last one. I think, you know, there wouldn't be Seven without Silence of the Lambs, and they're both great in different ways, and you know that it's part of an illustrious history. So I'm being nitpicky here. I actually don't have a problem with it. It can be as it is. It's just you can't help but think that as you're watching the film. Like, I'm sorry, who the fuck is Tracy Mills? Detective Mills' wife? And like,
yeah. I mean, I have to say, all of those criticisms are completely valid, but also kind of I hadn't really thought about them much because I guess I'm just enjoying the vibe, enjoying the confection that's been served up to me. I'm like, this is, you know, it's just all beautifully done. For you know, take it as what it is, which is a neo-noir horror thriller, and it ticks all the boxes what you'd want for it, but especially just how beautifully made it all is. The sound, pictures, direction, cinematography, all great.
I mean, I agree. Look, I will never be able to not do the Bechdel test when I'm watching a film, James. It actually does sadden me a little bit that I can't ever not think about that. But that aside, I completely agree with you. I think it is a perfect detective horror thriller, and that is a genre I have to say I absolutely love. I don't know what it is about detectives solving a crime. It will never.
It's a nice hook for a narrative, though, isn't it? It's like you know where we're going.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's the thing. Even the familiarity of the trope of the retiree and the young pup. I like to hit those tropes at the start of a movie. I like that familiarity, and then it to go somewhere else. That's nice.
Yeah, they hit the tropes, and they're hitting them because they're going to completely kind of fuck with those tropes by the end of it. Or those tropes get punished. They don't get rewarded as they usually do in these films.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, let's fuck with those tropes.
Yeah, man. See where it gets you. Your wife's head in a box.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for listening to another episode of Groovy Movies.
Thank you very much. And if you could find your way to leaving us a like or a nice review, it all helps get the podcast out to a bigger audience.
So we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Groovy Movies is produced and edited by us, Lily Austin and James Brailsford. And James also produced the theme music.
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Groovy Movies Pod, or email us groovymoviespod@gmail.com.
For more information about the films discussed, check out the show notes. I love that. Great ending.
Am I going to regret that?
No.
No, fuck it.